Hi, I'm Rick Iacoboni, and welcome to the Behind the Music of the Beatles presentation. Tonight I am going to tell you some neat, rare, behind-the-scenes stories about how Beatles songs were written, recorded, and performed. Now, many of you may know that John Lennon and Paul McCartney, they were the mainstays of the Beatles. They were the leaders, and they wrote most of the songs. In fact, together they wrote almost 180 Beatles songs, which is really hard to believe because the Beatles were together less than 10 years. So without further ado, let's jump into one of their more well-known songs, and that's Yesterday. Yesterday was primarily Paul's song. It was a song that came to him as an inspiration in the middle of the night. He woke up, the whole melody was intact. He went to the piano and started scratching out the notes because he wanted to make sure he didn't forget the music in the morning. So he started writing it all out, but he didn't have any lyrics to the song. So the working title of Yesterday was Scrambled Eggs. And the working lyrics were, scrambled eggs, oh, how I loved your legs, I believe in scrambled eggs. Now, Yesterday came very easily to Paul. In fact, he thought too easily. He played the song in front of the other Beatles. He played it in front of their producer, George Martin. And they say, hey, you didn't lift it from anybody. It's nobody else's song. It's your song, and it's a great song. And it certainly was, because Yesterday was very pivotal in the Beatles' career. It transitioned them in the eyes of the establishment from a long-haired rock band with funny accents from England to legitimate performers and composers. Yesterday is the most recorded song of all time with over 3,000 cover versions. And it's also the most played song of all time, having been played on American radio for over 7 million times. So here's my interpretation of Yesterday. The next song I'd like to talk about this evening is Ticket to Ride. It was primarily a John song. Now, when you look at the lyrics of the song at sort of first glance, you'll see it's written from the narrator's point of view. And it appears that the person's love of his life is leaving him forever, literally riding out of his life. However, the true inspiration of the song is a little bit different. The Beatles spent their formative years in two places. The first place was Liverpool, England, where they were born and raised. The second place was Hamburg, Germany. Now, by all accounts, Hamburg was portrayed as a very seedy type of town. It had all the vices in it: prostitution, drugs, sex, alcohol, high crime, and the Beatles were in the middle of it. Now, the slang term for sex was ride. And well, the ladies of the night, the working ladies, they were subjected to regular medical checkups. Upon receiving a clean bill of health, each girl was given a card, and on that card it attested that they were medically okay. But in John's eyes, it was their ticket to ride. So I'll bet you'll never look at that song the same way again, and that's the rest of the story. So here's Ticket to Ride. Okay, the next song I'd like to talk about this evening is With a Little Help from Your Friends, another great Lennon and McCartney composition. Now, even though it was pretty much John and Paul's show with the Beatles, they still believed in the band concept. So every album of the Beatles always had at least one or two songs in which George Harrison would sing and perform the songs. And then likewise for Ringo, he wasn't much of a songwriter, but they always made sure that he always had one vocal for every LP. And for Sgt. Pepper, this was Ringo's song. Now you have to go back in Beatles history just a couple years when the Beatles were on tour. George Harrison made the fatal mistake of telling somebody in an interview that he loves jelly beans. So from that point on, anytime the Beatles performed, they were just pelted with jelly beans. And at first it was kind of funny, then it was an annoyance, and then it became a safety issue because the Beatles were, in the early days, were playing in the round and they just never knew where these little bullets were coming from, but it really became a problem. So now you fast forward to the recording of Sgt. Pepper. Ringo's looking at the lyrics of With a Little Help from My Friends now for the first time, and he doesn't like what he's seeing. The original lyrics of this song went something like this: what would you do if I sang out of tune? Would you stand up and throw tomatoes at me? So he thought, wow, not tomatoes. So he took the lyrics back to John and Paul and said, remember what happened with George and those jelly beans? Well, if we keep the lyrics of this song exactly the same, and if I should ever go back on tour, on concert tour, or if we should ever go back out and tour again, I am going to be pummeled with tomatoes. Well, obviously, the rest of the Beatles thought this was really funny. They got a hoot out of it, and I think they just kept envisioning Ringo sitting up with his drum riser, drumming away, and all these tomatoes just coming at him. But after they sort of calmed down, they said, okay, Ringo, you're right, we'll change the lyrics. So what they changed the lyrics to were, what would you think if I sang out of tune? Would you stand up and walk out on me? So here's my rendition of With a Little Help from Your Friends. Behind the Music of the Beatles presentation features behind-the-scenes stories and acoustic guitar interpretations of songs from the band that shook the world. For bookings, please go to my website, www.domari.net, or call me, Rick Iacoboni, at 440-465-1725. Thank you.